Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious about, I guess first your content recognition technology. Maybe you could give us a kind of overview of that, and then also talk about the data inputs that you're using, particularly with respect to chemistry and now biology. Is there, what kinds of biological data, is coming in? How much is it accessible? Are there types of data that you want that you can't have? I'll stop asking questions right now and let you respond.
Sure. Well, starting from the beginning, our screening tech, the content ID, as we called it, was essentially a super high performance similarity search engine. So, in simple terms, it would enable you to index billions of items, whatever. It could be like for us, it's all vectors, right? But it is a vector representation of some information. It could be an image, it could be a video, it could be a molecule. And then, the way our platform was engineered initially was designed for speed so that you can perform a very quick searches and find similar vectors to the one that you are looking at. And depending on what you encode with this vector, you can apply this technology for different content types. So initially, as I said, we did it for videos or for images, but when it comes to molecules, this is where the term similarity search might be confusing because, like in chemistry or in drug discovery, when people say similarity search, they mostly mean structural similarity. So you look for a molecule that is structurally similar to the one you started with. In our cases, we meant something completely different. So what we encoded as those vectors were activity profiles of molecules. So we took data initially from binding DB, which essentially is in simple terms would be a small molecule in the protein, a pocket of a protein that it binds to. And so that together would be an activity profile for us. We would encode it, and then we would index this this data. And that would enable us to find for, like in some other larger data set, like for example, enamines synthesizable compounds database. We could find a small molecule that would be completely different structurally from the ones that we've ever seen in our original training data set, but that according to the neural net would have similar activity profile to something that you care about. Like for example, think of a patent busting use case. Like, when we started Bioptic, everyone was crazy about GLP-1s, right? So great, you log into Bioptic and you take a known ligand for or GLP-1, you put it into the system and ask it to search, let's say, a billion compound data set that either you brought as a library or something from one of our partners like e-molecules or enamine. And what Bioptic would be able to do is to find, let's say, 100 molecules that would be less than zero point 0.4 tanimoto similarity with the original molecule that you put in. However, they would have similar activity to the same receptor. And that was the original use case for like our very first technology when we just straight up adopted our first technology to bio. Of course, since then, we've built a lot of new tools. Like our new model that we're really proud of and we're really excited about, a structure-based model that we designed, works using completely different principles at this point, which means that you can just input any protein sequence for your target. It could be a completely novel target. It could be a target with no 3D structure resolved, actually. And the model would design a small molecule, or it would find a small molecule among the library that you would provide that would most likely bind to this pocket. And it will detect the pocket itself, pocket automatically. It will understand the 3D structure automatically. So you skip the whole AlphaFold or crystal structure step altogether, and it just spits out a number of molecules that you would take to the wet lab. So now it's a whole different game.
Yeah, and you mentioned several different databases that you're using to access that molecular data. Are you building a kind of proprietary database of BIOPTIC's own at this point? Are you still on the, always trying to bring in increasingly more data from more sources? What's your view on that?
Well, data is a huge problem for the industry in general, right? Let's start there. What I didn't realize getting into bio was, our thesis was we should be building AI for industries where there's a lot of data, a lot of capital, and not enough native AI talent. That's how we started. Uh, and bio seemed like a perfect industry. Clearly, a lot of data, clearly a lot of money, and probably like vast majority of people who graduate with data science, machine learning degrees, they do not go to Pfizer or Merck. They go to OpenAI at Google and Google. So it felt like, okay, this is an interesting opportunity for us to work on. However, when we would like when I looked into this, we realized that vast majority of data is proprietary, and in fact, it's not normalized. It's very often very noisy. Um, there's loads of problem, and I think even a bigger problem for someone like us who's trying to build a foundational like target agnostic technology is that the kind of data that the kind of data collection and generation technologies that you need if you're working on a specific program or specific target or even a specific modality, uh, that your approach to data generation is different from when you're trying to build something horizontal.
Mhm.
When you try to build something horizontal, you need a very diverse data set. You need, like, you cannot afford paying per data point as much as you would pay if you were working on a very narrow domain around certain targets, for example. There's a whole new set of challenges in terms of data generation if you're trying to do it across a vast chemical space, vast domain. So it's not a solved problem. Like all of the binding DB that we initially used to train our first model, I think it was like less than 10 million data points. It's like, I don't remember exact number, but it's something like around, let's say 10 million data points. The number of tokens that was used to train GPT, that was the first like truly generalizable language model, was around 1 trillion tokens, right? So it's what, six orders of magnitude, right? Difference. Uh, we are nowhere near a number of data points needed. And that's just in this one particular idea of like binding, right? But there's so many more parameters that you need to optimize. So it just, the industry itself does not have data. Even if we could pull all the data from all the proprietary sources at the moment, I'm convinced we don't have enough data to actually build something truly generalizable. And so, like right now, there's a new crop of tech bio companies that are trying to solve this from different angles. Dell libraries is interesting technology, phage displays, interesting stuff. And I think there's a reason why we're seeing so much progress in protein design right now is because sequence-based data in many cases can be synthetically generated. Like you can actually pre-train models with a lot of synthetic data, which is a fantastic opportunity. Doesn't solve all of your problems, but our new structure-based model is actually using pre-trained parts, like it's using parts of ESM, which was trained on billions of possible protein sequences. And so this combination of like real world technologies for measuring real wet experiments, but in a way that is economically viable, and combining it with either pure synthetic data or better scraped and better normalized and better classified public data from more niche sources like negative data from failed programs, for example, which is, I think, for now is still untapped opportunity. Like combining all those sources together is probably like what a lot of companies like ours are going to be doing over the next decade or so.
Do you see anything afoot that might contribute to the solution to that dearth of available data? And when I say that, I mean like any collaborative efforts, any industry-wide efforts to unlock some of this proprietary data, or to your point, some of this negative data that usually kind of gets left on the cutting room floor and ignored for its value to technologies like yours. I mean, if you look out 3, 5 years, do you see any influences that might not create a glut, but at least reverse the dearth of data that we're looking at right now?
Um, my honest answer is I don't know. I mean, there's been initiatives that looked promising, like Melody, right? It sounded like an interesting way of like federated learning, but I don't know if it, like, what was the impact of it. For now, my personal bet is that it's still going to be massive investment in data generation pipelines through automation, through new specifically designed assays that would make it possible to do it at a massive scale. Maybe some cross-modality data generation, like adapting sequence-based data and maybe like building like a Google Translate, quote unquote, for like peptides to small molecules, like that kind of stuff. There's ideas. There's like plenty of teams with ideas of how to build a data generation pipeline that would enable you to generate like billions or even trillions of new data points. And so my bet for now is that one of those efforts will more likely to succeed and actually start like generating new massive data sets across different targets, rather than existing data sets will somehow be reconciled and unlocked and whatnot. There's too much headwind in the way this industry is set up. Data is gold, and just like the way big pharma is set up is such that it's not really designed for sharing data at this point. Yeah. Like even for us, we are working with many customers, right? But we cannot really use specific data points from customer programs to train our foundational model because there's an IP issue, right? So basically, all those data points that we can use to refine a model for a specific program and actually make it more efficient for this target or this particular molecule, it is not really contributing to other programs. So we have to generate our own data that's actually like clean IP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How are you doing on time, Andrey?
I'm okay. Like
You're
Joe
okay?
Rogan me as much as you want, but yeah, I totally get it that at some point you'll have to cut it in pieces. So please stop when you feel like we should.
No, that's the direction we're going. We're going to turn this one into a 3 hour long episode. Good. I want to pivot a little bit to the landscape of AI players of several different flavors in biotech right now, and get a sense for where Bioptic fits and what you see playing out in this sort of nascent. I say nascent, but I mean it's maturing rapidly, I think, at least in terms of volume and applications. You've worked your entire career in some pretty competitive high-tech environments, so I'm curious about your perspective on this. We've had on this show a number of notable and well-funded biotechs that are building on AI backbones. I think of companies like Recursion. Chris Gibson's been on the show before, yes. Which just acquired Exscientia. I mean, that's a powerhouse there. Ben referenced when we were chatting in advance of the episode, Hong Kong-based in Silico Medicine, another one. Just a couple weeks ago, Vic Bajaj from Foresight Labs was on the show, and they just launched a new company called Zera, a biopharmaceutical development company called Zera, with $1 billion in funding behind it, AI driven. Yeah. So there's that. You look at like in the mid tier, like Flagship Pioneering, every company that they spin out these days has got an AI backbone. And then further downstream, looking at like sort of the service, like application service providers, if you will, you've got a ton of these little, I shouldn't say little, but smaller sort of it's cottage industry of companies like like Profluent and Evolve. They've been on their founders have been on the show as well, and they're looking to provide AI as a service to biotechs. As it stands right now, and then maybe forward looking, a few years down the road, where do you kind of see Bioptic fitting on this landscape?
Sure. Well, first let's talk about my view on the industry in general. I think every pharma in 10 years from now will be AI first pharma. Like, to me, it's pretty clear, right? At the end of the day, drug discovery and drug development is about working with vast amount of data, making decisions, and progressing and designing something using this data. We've been doing it originally, like science was done hypothesis-driven way, where human with a big brain comes up with some great idea and then collects some data to refine this idea, builds a very local, very specific model to sort of help steer in a close proximity to the original hypothesis, and like then either prove it or disprove it and move on. And we move from that world to the world where we do data first research, where we're mining ginormous data sets, and then like nowadays we're creating some super smart foundational models that can generalize foundational concepts from those data sets, and then start spitting out decisions that were not even human driven. It's a whole different world we're approaching. And so to me, it's pretty clear that human brain's ability to deal with vast amounts of data over the next 10 years will not evolve dramatically. However, our AI technologies will improve orders of magnitudes. Right. So to me, it's pretty obvious that just like every retail became an e-commerce over the last 15 years, 20 years, similarly, every pharma will be an AI company going forward. Now, what does it take to be a great AI company? Well, I think to build AI advantage, you need three things, very roughly. Right? You need talent advantage, so you need to have people who are really good at it. You need data advantage, and you need compute advantage. And eventually, compute advantage means, for now, it means do you have access to chips? Eventually, it will mean do you have access to enough energy? So at this large scale, if you think of this like from the top level, right? If the transition from today to the future of pharma is similar to the transition from like old school retailers to today's retail, which is all e-commerce enabled, and you think of the number of enabling technologies and different kinds of companies that make this transition possible, you realize that there's a lot of opportunity. In the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot of different shapes and forms of companies that contribute to this eventual outcome of an AI-enabled pharma. And sure, like in e-commerce, you had a fully vertically integrated players like Amazon, who started in the very beginning of this transition and were very different from retailers back then. And at that time, like brick and mortar retailers were, laughing at them. And then eventually this huge vertically integrated companies became the massive dominating force. And so, I think we're going to see that in pharma. So, we probably will find some new big pharma that will be an AI first company. And maybe Zyra is one of those companies. Maybe Isomorphic will be one of those companies. I don't know. But again, like drawing this parallel with retail, you also see that there's a lot of horizontal technology companies that enable different parts of the stack. You have tons of smaller shops run by e-commerce platforms like Shopify, or using Shopify technology, or you have the ginormous company Stripe that is essentially like enabling all the payments industry, and so on and so forth. There's so much in the stack to unpack, and each one of those layers is a ginormous opportunity. So back to your question, yes, there's a lot of AI companies out there, and they have all sorts of different shapes and forms when you double click into them. Some of them are, effectively a biotech that is using AI technology to progress a number of assets they care about. Some of them are trying to be a horizontal platform, but let's say those were like the first wave of AI companies back in 2010, 2014. they just didn't have enough enabling technology back then, and nor they had enough data or compute to actually deliver on that promise. And so we saw a lot of very disappointing, you know, cases where, you know, companies just did not deliver and did not get even with one asset into clinic over the last 10 years, right? And we'll know different examples here. I think there's a new wave of companies right now that are relying on the modern AI technology that, you know, transform architecture, like the new generation of chips that enable way bigger sort of data processing capability. And that also they do their own high throughput data generation. And so I think this is like the current state of the art, and there's a lot of excitement there. And some of them are trying to be like sort of a horizontal platform enablers, and some of them are also just using this technology for their own internal therapeutic programs. And so from now on, like in the future, as I mentioned, I do think that there's going to be more and more new, like next generation AI companies that would actually try to solve biology and model cells and maybe even bigger like tissues and organs using AI technology. We're not nowhere near that yet. I don't know when it's going to happen, but there's also going to be a huge next wave, a big new crop of companies that will enable that at some point. All that to say is, yes, there's a bunch of companies out there. I do think there's a lot of opportunity, and then the question is like, how do you combine your talent advantage, your data advantage, and your compute advantage vectors to create a meaningful proposition? In our case, we do have talent advantage for sure. Just, you know, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're lucky to be able to hire people who otherwise would have worked at Google or Intel, or like, you know, our head of science is from Atomwise, and we have people from Insilico, from Neuralink, from Apple, working in Bioptech. It's a very strong team. We are working on our data advantage strategy at the moment. Like we have our own strategy that we're pursuing, but I'm not ready to disclose it yet. We do not have any compute advantage beyond, like, you know, comparing to Google or, you know, NVIDIA. We don't have our own data centers. We don't have our own chips. So that is the part where, you know, at some point we'll have to figure something out, but we're relying on existing platforms and we're not limited by it for now. And as a go-to-market strategy, I think we found a very interesting angle that actually enabled us to sign those first deals, like first commercial deals. And, you know, I'm really excited about what's to come next year because this approach of trying to get to market through people who enable investments in single asset companies or smaller biotechs, it's a meaningful strategy that so far worked well for us. So partnering with venture creation funds, bringing our talent advantage and our technology to their investments to de-risk them and help discover new opportunities, altogether seem to be working for us. And we'll see where we end up. And one last thing I wanted to mention is, you know, software company versus, you know, more classic asset ownership. Like there's always going to be a debate there. You know, when we started, as you can imagine, like I come from consumer applications world. Of course, we wanted to build pure software play, but just, you know, learning more about this industry, we realized that the way to capture value is to have a share in the actual assets and selling results rather than selling services or software. So at this point, we are, you know, the way we try to monetize is through equity in the resulting assets. And I know that there are like some very successful companies who go pure software way, but we picked this path, and for now, it's working well for us.
Andrey, I wanted to ask a question about your internal pipeline. I think you mentioned a preclinical program with GLP-1s and in Parkinson's as well. I was curious, you know, how you chose those, if it was, you know, if it had more to do with the data that you have access to, or, you know, you're looking at therapeutic areas. Obviously, GLP-1s, obesity and diabetes are hugely lucrative. Parkinson's, huge unmet need. You know, what what would you say about, the choosing, I guess, of those programs? And then if you have any sense of how far away you are from clinical trials.
Yeah, to clarify, we do not have GLP-1 program. We are
Okay.
working on TINIC target, and we believe that like there is our hypothesis is that it is a target that can be relevant in obesity indication. And yes,
Everybody these days is just associating obesity with GLP-1s.
yeah,
Easy to
yeah,
do.
yes, but there are other targets too.
Yeah.
Yes, and answering your question, how we picked those targets? Very honestly, just following business opportunity. So those are not completely novel targets, right? The existing molecules for either of the targets we're going after. We saw an opportunity. We needed something to start testing our technology independently without any delays from partners and whatnot. So we picked a couple of reasonably hot targets where we knew that was different enough to test our technology in different ways. And we knew that in case those go well, we can have a valuable asset. So we're pursuing them. We're going to solve whatever. We're going to predict clinical trials one outcomes, toxicity outcomes at the early stages using our technology and whatnot, like all sorts of things like that. Altogether, they are platform technologies that are platform agnostic, that are target agnostic, and that potentially make resulting biotech more capital efficient.
Yeah.
And yes, Matt, like you did mention that maybe one day we found ourselves being a biotech. Someone told me, a fellow tech bio founder told me once, well, when tech bio fails, it becomes a biotech.
Is that how it works?
If you cannot sell your platform, you cannot like make your platform valuable enough to scale it the way you initially planning, like what we are thinking of right now, then yes, you end up just valuing your company at the value of the assets you've developed so far.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why like there was a lot of disappointment with first wave of AI companies who really, really tried super hard to build a scalable platform and did not invest enough into moving their internal assets to like clinical stage. And then by the time became clear that platform itself is not monetizing, they didn't have any clinical stage assets. And at this point, okay, like they're not valuable anymore, right? And so those like huge drops in valuations that we've seen are driven by that. So we're trying to like kind of be somewhere, we're balancing between the two, because yes, we are tech bio, but we do try to own equity in all the programs that we're working on, and that's how we try to seize capture the value that we're creating.
Andrey, I apologize if I missed this earlier, but did you, and to the point that you were just making, do you have an approximate timeline of when you might go into the clinic with your internal assets?
These are the forward-looking statements we ask for when there's no public relations or investor relations representative on the call with you.
Yes, and I. As much as I would like to boast about our uber optimistic timeline and roadmap, yes, of course we have a roadmap, and we are, pushing really hard to get there. I do not think that it would be appropriate to make those statements in this call. However, what I do want to say is that at least with those two assets that we own, our goal to hopefully set a record timeline from starting the program to IND enabling studies phase, but that is yet remain to be seen. We had a killer year. It's been super fast, and every advisor and every investor we have told me that it's unprecedentedly fast. How we got from where we started to where we are now. However, it doesn't mean that it's going to go as fast over the next year. I'm very optimistic, though.
Are there any specific plans that you can share with us for 25? I mean, this episode is gonna drop right around the turn of the year, so give us kind of a glimpse or a forward-looking hope or forecast, right, for 25.
Sure, I can talk about the platform plans, and that's the part I'm mostly excited about. As I mentioned earlier, we have developed our new structure-based model that is extremely promising. Like, think of it, it would enable things that, state-of-the-art models like AlphaFold 3 enable at the moment, but it's a ridiculously simplified architecture, which means it's way more nimble, it's easier to deal with. The way we describe it internally is, if you're following space industry, and you might have seen like this transition from Raptor 1 engine to Raptor 3 engine in SpaceX, where they dramatically simplified the design of the engine, removed a lot of like tubes and components that were like covering this original design, and that makes the whole thing way more manageable. So this is how we think about BIOPTIC 1, the structure-based model that we're working on. So the plan for the next year would be, once we have all the data ready, to publish a paper on it and actually present it to the world like in a more public way. But meanwhile, we're using it for a number of programs to actually progress those molecules internally. So that's one, structure-based model and publishing the paper around it. And two, on the business side, fingers crossed. I mentioned one deal that we signed last year, but we have a couple more exciting deals that are in the works right now. So I hope we'll be able to announce all of them sometimes earlier next year, hopefully. And actually, like, at this point, I could be less cryptic about our partners and people we're working with and the kind of deals we sign.
Yeah. What about internal growth, like company growth? Are you looking to make any strategic hires, grow personnel or talent there?
Yes, we've tried, we have an outstanding team at the moment, and I try to move as fast as possible with as small number of humans employed as possible. That said, we are, I feel like we're reaching the limit, so we're going to be hiring both on the science side, on like a life science side of things, and also on the computational science, so AI researchers. We're probably going to start growing our business team too, but that I'm not sure about. And I think like sometime next year, we're going to be raising the next round. We're getting ready to.
Yeah, very cool. Well, listen, we've been abusing your time, Andrey. I appreciate all the time that you've given us, but we do need to wrap things up. And you just brought up, you were talking about the computational team and the biology team. And I want to have you back on the show for a more, maybe a tighter episode where I don't keep you for an hour and a half, to talk about that, the marriage of these two things. We've been talking about like the marriage of computational minds and biology minds for a couple of years now. And when we first started talking about that, it was sort of like, well, you put them in the same room and you make them talk to one another. But now, as this concept has matured, and you have companies like BIOPTIC that are actually bringing, onboarding this talent. I think it'd be fun to have a conversation about how we're consummating this marriage in real time. So if you're game for that, we're going to have you back on sometime down the road to talk about that and all the progress that we expect to see out of BIOPTIC in the coming year.
I'd be privileged to come again and talk about the marriage of tech and bio, because I think that's the most interesting thing that is happening in the industry at the moment. Yeah. All the most interesting things, they happen at intersections, and the intersection of AI, which is essentially artificial evolution life, and bio, which is the actual evolution life. This intersection seems to be the most exciting things.